No, Vincenzo, you make big trouble here. Between the FBI and the police, we can't even make a move. No. The Federation is finished. The experiment is over.
Don Vittorio.
Vincenzo, with all the money you made from this Federation, you can't even give the right share to your boss. Do I have to tell you?
Don Vittorio, you don't understand. It's not your money because it's not my money. It belongs to the people who contributed to the Federation for the fight against discrimination and for works of charity. If we pull out now, it's like admitting what we are to the whole world.
The world knows what we are. You think you fool anybody? The judges, the police, the politicians who need our favors, they know what we are. It suits them. Why do you think they've all turned against us now? Because we've drawn attention to ourselves. And when we draw attention to ourselves, we draw attention to them. No, you've upset the balance that makes this thing of ours work.
Don Vittorio, I can't stop now. This thing's too big. People out there, they need me. They need the Federation.
We can do some good work here. We've got a hospital going and a camp.
Vince? You go back to running your businesses. We'll find somebody else clean to take over this Federation thing. But you finish it. I tell you this for your own good.
Vittorio. I can't. It'll all fall apart without me.
Angelo. Arrivederci. Angelo.
Yes.
When does Joe get out?
The fat man blubbered back when the Gallos took him hostage, but Joe Colombo didn't play the greaseball ruse, feigning weakness to slip out of trouble. A South Brooklyn tough guy raised on movies and jukeboxes, he told the Gallos that if they were going to kill him like a man. Released, unharmed, Colombo didn't hold a grudge, although he didn't appreciate how the Gallos tried to ambush him, lying in wait as he came home from the country club after a round of golf. Colombo paid less attention to his Don than his Dun & Bradstreet rating, rising after a stretch of solid investments on his turf: Kaplan Buick, Cantalupo Realty, and Prospero Funeral Home, solid nest eggs for his sons, Anthony and Joe Jr. Colombo had high hopes for his boys, knowing if an Irish bootlegger could put his sons in the White House, an Italian bookie might be next. He looked ahead to the glass towers of Midtown, where big scores were made with briefcases, not guns, but the fat man threatened to drag him back to feudal Sicily. Waging vendettas against his enemies, the fat man expected Colombo to take out Carlo Gambino and his cohorts on the commission. It was mad, like trying to shoot up IBM. Colombo played the smart move. He ratted out the fat man. Banished for life by the commission, the fat man slunk back to Long Island. Attorney General Robert Kennedy had been asking for confidential reports to determine the meaning of the Gallo-Profazzi War. From his office came a brilliant new strategy to deal with the escalation, a one-line memorandum sent out January 11th, 1962, asking, "Why don't we let them shoot each other?" Signed, Hopeful. In the meantime, Kennedy enacted a policy of constant and continual harassment through the Justice Department, cheap shots to whittle away the Gallos on nickel-and-dime offenses. The NYPD arrested the four Gallos more than 100 times on charges ranging from vagrancy to consorting to loud and boisterous cards on Umberto. Not letting up while the going was good, the FBI contacted the Eastern Military Academy, where Larry's son went to school, the tuition paid for with a $400 check that disappeared from the Delmonico Club. Scouring through Larry Gallo's tax returns, the IRS struck gold upon discovering that Larry obtained a $10,000 GI mortgage from the Veterans Administration to purchase a house in Midwood, Brooklyn. In his application to the Dime Savings Bank to approve the mortgage, a certified letter signed by his father claimed that Larry made $200 a week in salary at Jackie's Charcolette. Larry's tax returns listed only a fraction of that amount. It was a nothing charge, but the FBI agents told him, "We've got you one way or the other, Larry. You can either admit you were lying on your mortgage application or else tell the IRS that you cheated on your tax return." Larry wasn't going to go out like Capone. He pled guilty to defrauding the Veterans Administration. In August 1963, backed up by Punchy and 4 other Gallos sitting behind the guardrail, Larry stood before the judge in Brooklyn Federal Court and took his licks. 4 months in jail and 14 months on probation. Storming out of court, Gallos pushed newspapermen out of the way as they took Larry down the elevator, leaving behind Umberto in the scuffle. Reporters asked about the $20,000 price on the head of each of his sons. "They are good boys," said Umberto, "and I think they can take care of themselves." Shuffling down the 7 flights, Umberto prepared to get shipped back to Torre del Greco. At the start of the gang war, on orders of the Immigration Commissioner in D.C., INS officers burst into the headquarters of the Direct Vending Machine Company and arrested Umberto for being an illegal alien. They took him by the arms and dragged him out to the car. "I'm glad this didn't happen at my mother's house," spat Joey. The old folks on President Street shouted down insults from their fire escapes. "This man, by his own admission," said an INS official, "entered the U.S. illegally in 1920 by jumping ship in Boston. His file has been open since 1960. There is serious doubt that he can meet that requirement of the law which deals with good moral character." At the deportation hearing that fall, 13 witnesses testified how Umberto worked hard all of his life, from his days engraving at Diagonal and Sons to his current job, sweeping up the floor of the Sidge's factory for fine Italian reproduction furniture 2 days a week, $1.50 an hour. Nobody dared say anything against the father of the notorious Gallo brothers. Now that Umberto was found guilty of defrauding the VA by signing that mortgage letter for Larry, the crime would go a long way toward proving his bad character. The boat to Naples was bound to be bleak, but fate gave Umberto a clear day in Dallas to offset that rainy night on the South Brooklyn piers. Jack was dead. Bobby left office. Nobody cared about the Gallos, fading from the limelight after accepting terms for peace and taking their place at the bottom of the newly crowned Colombo family. Nobody cared about a small-time gang without a good war to read about in the tabloids. Nobody cared to deport an old man like Umberto. Citizens for Harmony. Joey walked barefoot into the Attica yard, wearing a big straw hat like Van Gogh. He set up his canvas and brush-stroked. Pretty soon, remembered Slick Willie, there'd be a whole mob of art critics standing around watching him. Transferred out of Attica on the sterling recommendation of Dr. Bruce, Joey branched out into oils. He asked his sister to send him an easel and 4 canvases on stretchers. His dark and gloomy works ranged from a crouched leopard to a self-portrait, with olive skin against a deep red backdrop and animal eyes. He looked ready to pounce. Greenhaven Correctional Facility was more conducive toward Joey's artistic growth. It was a 2-hour drive from Brooklyn, and Joey's family easily made the commute, bringing monthly packages culled from his extensive wish lists, requesting 3 cartons of Camels, White Owl cigars, boxes of C. Howard violet mints, Swiss night cheese, sour pickles, cans of bacala, salmon and pastine tuna fish, a head of lettuce, a few pounds of candy, wild root hair dressing, new formula, 2 dozen mixed fizzies, all flavors, and a dozen whole wheat Syrian loaves from Atlantic Avenue. Spreading the bread around, Joey doled out gifts to his fellow inmates, expanding his power base across the Greenhaven yard, the gang turf of young lords, Black Panthers, and Black Muslims, each group congregated in their own section of the yard. Joey roamed free. Joey didn't give a shit what you were, remembered Harlem heroin dealer Nicky Barnes. You'd see him walk around the yard, stopping whenever he'd want and talking to whoever he wanted to. For the first time in years, not even Profazzi's had a contract on him, fortunate given Junior Persico's connections in Green Haven. Nicky remembered how Junior's brother, Alley Boy, stuffed toilet paper into his hat to protect his brain as star quarterback of the prison football team. "I don't want to play football," said Joey. "What the hell is that shit? Those guys are crazy. You could get killed. I read. I go see the rabbi. I like the rabbi. He's a straight shooter. I don't bother with the priest, a bullshit artist, but I saw a lot of the rabbi." In the mess, Joey joined a table that relished pulp spy novels. The gangster book club included old-timer Sammy Katz, who first introduced jogging to the yard, chess master Martin Yamin, a former judge turned stick-up man, narcotics wholesaler Matty Madonna, and the black man Madonna groomed to make him rich, Nicky Barnes. On weekends, the yard opened at noon. Nicky stood in a circle with the black Muslims, reading Muhammad Speaks. They spoke of Lazarus, the need to rise from the grave of irresponsibility and break free from the scourge of the white devils. Nicky spoke about Harold Cruz, who wrote The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. Joey had finally found a sparring partner to debate finer points of existential philosophy. Talk devolved from Camus to what they knew best. Nicky dug the chicks that came up to visit Joe. "Beautiful fucking women," said Nicky, like they'd just come off the beach somewhere. Putting his arm around Nicky, walking him around the yard, Joey laid down the plan through the corner of his mouth. "He wanted to form a tight-knit cadre to stick up trucks," said Nicky. "Joey loved hijacking." Joey had his eye on a bigger score, hijacking a Muslim brotherhood. He explained to Nicky how a family was organized, with the Don on top and button men at the bottom. Risk flowed down. Money flowed up. A perfectly oiled machine for pushing heroin, which had been thrown out of whack after the recent commission dope ban. Heroin still flowed in bulk from the French Connection to the quiet tenements of Uptown's Little Italy in East Harlem, but instead of using their own men to do the dirty work, the ruling class shuffled their packages to black dealers across Lenox Avenue. Enslaved on a higher plane, a dealer got no stake in the capital. He was kept out of the poppy fields in Turkey, the labs in Marseille, and the cutting rooms on Pleasant Avenue, where pure dope got weak enough to keep him on a leash, always coming back for more. Harlem was a wild west of dope, but if the dealers awoke from the Novocaine, broke the chains, and got their shit together, Uptown Brothers and Gallo Brothers could take it to the streets in a truly funky revolution. Mayor John Lindsay saw it all melt before him on a scorching July afternoon in 1966. Refusing to have a riot on his hands like the one in Watts the summer before, the liberal, movie star handsome mayor went straight to the pressure cooker, the Brooklyn neighborhood of East New York. Without sending his advance men to check out the hostile territory, Lindsay toured the south side of New Lots Avenue, predominantly Italian working class. "Go back to Africa, Lindsay, and take your niggers with you," a resident shouted. The mayor entered Frank's restaurant on New Lots Avenue, situated on the racial dividing line. He told the customers that they should talk together and try to work things out. Gathering outside on a triangular concrete traffic island, 40 white youths from Sponge, the Society for the Prevention of Negroes Getting Everything, picketed the mayor, chanting, 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want to integrate. Police barricades rose. 40 young black men who wanted their face time with the mayor marched in from the north side of New Lots, but a patrol car had already shuttled Lindsay back to Manhattan. Sponge picketers crashed through the barricade. Shots rang out. A sniper fired from a rooftop, killing 11-year-old Eric Dean. Hundreds arrived at the scene. United black people circulated leaflets to the crowd, which informed, "Whitey has done it again. Innocent Eric Dean was shot down by white racist cops or gangs. Whitey wanted for murder. Justice now." Gangs ran through the Italian section of New Lots in search of Whitey. Molotov cocktails dropped from the rooftop of an apartment building. 300 policemen arrived at the scene. Dr. Frank C. Aracale, the city youth board director, learned that gangs of Italians and blacks prepared to converge on new lots to shoot it out. In the heyday of juvenile delinquency, the 1950s, youth boarders would hang around the candy stores and dole out smokes to get an in with the gangs. Acting as missionaries rather than beat cops, members of the controversial organization did anything in their power to curb gang violence, even sitting on war council meetings, trying to get rivals to agree to a fair one. Now, even the all-out Prospect Park rumble of the South Brooklyn boys seemed tame compared to what lay ahead. Accompanied by youth board advisor Rabbi Schrage, founder of the Maccabees, a vigilante group roaming the streets of Crown Heights, Dr. Aracale headed out to President Street. Pete the Greek stood on guard on the corner. "It was a rabbi, all right," said the Greek, "a real Jewish rabbi, complete with the beard, yarmulke, and all." Rabbi Schrage told the Greek that he was looking for the gallows. The sit-down occurred at Roy's luncheonette, a few doors from the dormitory. Kid Blast sent off the gang and offered his guests cigarettes. He introduced Rabbi Schrage to his father. "You do it," said Umberto. Blast sat with his lawyer, Dr. Aracale, and Rabbi Schrage over sodas and smokes. He wanted to know how the youth board proposed to keep the kids off the streets. "If you stop the fighting," said Blast, "it'll happen again next week. What are you going to do for an encore? What about education and jobs? They have no preparation. What are you do-gooders going to do about that?" Larry and Joey hoped Blast would be the one to go to college. Blast was bitter about having to educate himself on President Street. He wanted to know what was in it for him. "The Rockefellers started out as a bunch of robber barons, but by doing good works their name is blessed," said Dr. Aracale. "Maybe the Gallows could do the same thing." "From your lips to God's ear," said Blast, flashing a grin to Rabbi Schrage. He agreed to help. The rabbi promised to pray for the Gallows, but stressed that the nature of his job should be on social work, not strong-arming. Armed with a signed letter identifying him as chairman of the Emergency Citizens for Harmony in East New York, deeming him an ad hoc intergroup relations committee working to ease community tensions, Blast made his way to New Lots Avenue. Meeting with the Italian gang leaders at a local restaurant, Blast stood at the head of a long table and announced, "The purpose of this meeting is to avert bloodshed. I expect you to feel the way I do. Anyone who doesn't, say so right now, and I'll pay for his psychiatric fees. I'm not here to listen to your problems or your grievances, and I know they are many. Tell the rabbi about them later, but it's too dangerous to take the time now. How are we going to stop people from killing? Any suggestions?" "We're not looking for trouble," said one angry youth. "It's the others." "Then what are you doing in East New York? Shut up and sit down." "I hear a rumor the Gallows have been asked to make peace in New York," said Elliot Golden, the chief assistant to Aaron E. Kuda, Brooklyn DA. "That's incredible," said DA Kuda. The Gallows were the bane of public decency, an affront to law and order, and a waste of taxpayer dollars. On January 8, 1965, Judge Rinaldi of the State Supreme Court sentenced Larry and Blast to 6 months on assault. He slapped 6 months on Punchy, 3 months on 10 other Gallows. Fines. D.A. Kuda hailed it as a milestone in the history of criminal prosecutions in New York. He only wished the judge could throw the key into the goannas. Kuda demanded that the Gallows meet him at his office in Borough Hall, but the brothers refused to show. "They have nothing to gain from such a meeting except further notoriety," said their uncle, Joseph Iovine, Esquire. Uncle Joe told the press that the Gallows were happy to assist the civic community and would like to develop a new image of themselves as servants to law-abiding citizens over racketeers. "You can't always deal with people who are leaders in the Boy Scout movement," concluded Mayor Lindsay. "Sometimes you must call upon individuals with fairly rough backgrounds. I, as mayor, don't live in a cocoon. It was hot and dangerous at the time, and I am very thankful that all aspects of the neighborhood agreed to cool it." The mayor said he would certainly call on the Gallows again if the need arose. White guards stood on the prison catwalks with rifles, ready to shoot down inmates like rabid dogs. Oppressed by Gestapo tactics of strip searches and beatings, the prisoners spoke out against the cruel and unusual punishments of the imperialists. The time had come to break down the walls separating black Muslims, Black Panthers, and 5%ers. It was time to unite all of the prison's 400 black nationalists, a fourth of the population in the concentration camp called Auburn Correctional Facility. On November 2nd, 1970, honored as Black Solidarity Day, inmates refused to grind out industrial products in boiling slave labor sweatshops, which contributed nothing to the pockets of the people, but to the free enterprising connections of the racist Empire State. For 5 hours, the strikers sat around the yard, played ball, and returned peacefully to their cells while the 14 strike organizers were keep-locked. 2 days later, the Black Solidarity Day movement told the yard not to line up for work detail until the superintendent returned the keep-locked strike organizers to the population. Raising their voices over the PA system on a platform in the middle of the central yard, the Black Solidarity Day movement leaders announced that their 14 keep-locked brothers must be released. Fists went up in the air. No more shucking and jiving. Fists went up in the air. They were going to get what they wanted or die trying. Fists went up in the air. This wasn't just for black militants, but young lords, denied Spanish-speaking guards to listen to their needs. It was even for Whitey. The Black Solidarity Day movement rallied whites across the yard to join. Inmate number 62167 was invited to give a speech to rally the cause. If he didn't take a stand on the platform, he was part of the disease. Taking the mic, Joey told the whites to stay out of the black thing. The crowd booed and cursed him as the white devil. A prison sergeant forced his way up on the stand to regain control, but no use. The Black Solidarity Day movement put the heat on the crowd. The word was out. The inmates were going to take over the prison. They outnumbered the guards 25-1. Hostages would be taken. Joey forced his way back onto the podium. He told the whites to cool it. If there was a riot, wait it out in the corner of the yard. If an officer ordered them back to their cells, do it. He said he'd die if he had to, but nobody was going to stop him from following the orders of the hacks. The crowd got angry. All hell broke loose, said one witness. Grabbing clubs from the guards and lengths of pipe, revolutionaries secured Auburn's 4 cell blocks. Fueled by shouts breaking through the PA system, railing against the fascist regime, comrades cut off the prison telephone service, herded up white guards, dragged them to the center of the yard, poured on gasoline, and threatened to light up. Joey ran to get a knife from the Polak in A block. Pushing through the rioters, Joey made his way to a hostage, a prison guard injured in the siege. Joey dragged him out of danger, down to the lower hall for medical treatment. No one tried to stop Crazy Joe. Word in the joint was that he could bite your ear off. As the siege raged in Auburn, prisoners insisted on a meeting with Governor Rockefeller. "They want the works," reported the commissioner. Better clothing, a revision of the rules on censored letters, more black social programs, a competent psychiatric staff, additional parole board hearings, Spanish-speaking guards, healthier food, an expanded law library, and the release of all 14 keep-locked brothers. 200 state police got ready to smash through the gray-brown walls of Auburn to demonstrate what happened to rebels. "Cooler heads prevailed," said the deputy superintendent. The revolt was over by that evening as 72 revolutionaries were cordoned off into special disciplinary areas. They threw shit on the guards in protest. One claimed that a guard went at him with an axe handle, while another said they used a fire hose. A group from the Youth Against War and Fascism took the bus up from Manhattan, demanding the release of the Auburn 6, the Auburn 72, and all political prisoners. In his gray-roofed colonial in Merrick, Long Island, Larry opened the refrigerator, kept stocked by his wife on her daily trips to the supermarket. Dropping several ice cubes in his glass, he added scotch to his milk to make a brown cow, his signature drink. His youthful feats of daring on President Street long forgotten, Larry's notoriety now rested as the local mobster. Once, Larry's son let the family dog go on the neighbor's yard. "I told my wife to tell him to cut it out," said the neighbor. "Then I found out who he was, and I told her not to say anything." Putting Verdi on the hi-fi, Larry let himself out onto the back deck, looking out over South Oyster Bay. With no hitmen lurking in the suburban streets with a trunkload of shotguns and grenades, Larry had time to reminisce on his golden years of running numbers for Frankie Shots, and on Larry, Joey, and Kid Blast, the mob prodigies who were destined to become the next Murder, Inc. Larry sipped his brown cow, enjoying prestige, respect, and peace as a capo of the Colombo family. For a while it looked as though Larry would make it, remembered Pete the Greek. But he wasn't making anything. He was dying hard, and he knew he was dying. In late 1967, Larry began a cobalt treatment for cancer. His operation at St. Vincent's left him shriveled in his bed, propped upright, shivering in a fever under a hospital blanket. "Where's Joey?" "He's coming," said the Greek. Joey had arranged for a leave to see his dying brother. "He said he'd come, and he'll come." When Joey strode into the hospital room, Larry looked off like he hadn't been waiting for years. "What are you shaking for?" asked Joey. Larry said it was the bed. Joey told him to get his old lady in the sack with him, like Jane Russell in The Outlaw, to keep warm. At Joe Colombo's Prospero Funeral Home on 86th Street in Flatbush, FBI men clicked their mini-cameras across the tree-lined street from St. Rose of Lima's, a gray limestone church. 27 limos pulled up. 7 pallbearers carried Larry down the steps. 5 cars driving slowly, covered in flowers, led the wreathed procession into Greenwood Cemetery. The chrysanthemum-laden mahogany coffin was lowered into the open grave. When the crowd at Auburn strained to hear what Joey was going to deliver through the mic, he could have sparked them on, hell-bent on a bloodbath, like the one to take place a year later at Attica. But up there, in front of the yard, Joey had a moment of clarity. Why should he die for the revolution? The black nationalists called Joey a Judas for betraying their cause, but the superintendent wrote him a memo praising his commendable acts in the heat of the riot. As a reward to prisoner number 62167, the commissioner approved Joseph Gallo's good behavior allowance report. 5 years of lost time for rotten behavior were regained. Joey was sent to Sing Sing to finish out his last months, safe from the death threats of the Black Solidarity movement. He turned 42 on April 6, 1971. For the first time in his life, Joey took the sacraments from someone he had once called a bullshit artist, a prison chaplain affiliated with Lincoln Hall, a Catholic institution for juvenile delinquents. Joey told his parole officer that he planned to speak to the boys on leading productive lives and finding employment, despite never holding a steady job himself. The Stampede. Nobody disrespected Joe Colombo on his turf, Cantalupo Realty, sitting on a stretch of 86th Street in Bensonhurst. "He has the sincerest group of clients," said Anthony Cantalupo. "They don't cheat him out of his commissions." Aside from his real estate interests, Colombo earned $30 off of every car sold at Kaplan Buick across the street. The glossy showroom was a perfect spot to conduct family business. If a cop tried to break up a meet, all a guy had to say was, "Hey, buddy, I'm just looking to buy the wife a Buick." Customers were thorough, sometimes stopping by for weeks before they broke down and signed the papers to finance a Skylark. Buicks became the new Cadillac in the Colombo family. A respectable car salesman, Colombo didn't like how an ever-present FBI agent, a big Irishman named Bernie Welsh, stood on the sidewalk in front of Kaplan Buick and howled, "Whoo, Joe!" To remedy the problem, Colombo goons led Dennis Dillon, head of the federal strike force against organized crime, by the arm into Cantalupo Realty. "Don't worry, Mr. Dillon," said Colombo. "Nothing's going to happen to you, but these agents, they don't respect me." "The federal men are lousy," Colombo griped to Detective Seidman of the NYPD. "They are bigots. I expect they will be after me before long. I never say this to my family, but I swear to God the FBI is going to frame me somehow." On April 30th, 1970, the FBI booked Colombo's pride and joy, his fat 23-year-old son, Joe Jr., on conspiracy to melt silver coins into ingots. That very evening, Colombo got Sammy the Bull, Shorty Spiro, and a handful of the family's heavy hitters to picket the FBI's Upper East Side headquarters on 69th Street and 3rd Avenue. They sounded like the Seven Dwarfs. Heidi, 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 ho, FBI has got to go. Heidi, 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 ho, FBI has got to go. Shuttle buses ran to pick up wise guys from their Brooklyn social clubs, dropping them off to join the evening picket. They'd settled into a routine, shout for an hour, then travel up 2 blocks to P.J. Bernstein's for corned beef. It made surveillance easy for the feds. Taking pictures of the picket line, they got a complete portfolio of the Colombo family, whose boss wore a wide, striped power tie and took to the airwaves like he was running for the Senate. "I'd see Colombo on the late news with that overweight son of his beside him," said Chief Seidman. "They'd claim the mafia was a myth, that we law enforcement officials were pinning all the ills of society on Italian-Americans." On the Dick Cavett show, Colombo said he was just an average guy who owned a piece of a funeral parlor. The audience snickered. Colombo didn't think it was funny. The audience clammed up. Believing that he was ordered to do God's work, Colombo put the heat on Alka-Seltzer's Spicy Meatballs commercial, which depicted a round Italian woman, her hair in a bun, serving up a mound of spaghetti and meatballs. "Mamma mia!" cried her suspendered, mustachioed husband. "That's a spicy meatball." Programmers pulled it. Headquartered in a sleek skyscraper office on Madison Avenue and 59th Street, staffed by men in pastel-ribbed turtlenecks, Colombo's Italian-American Civil Rights League took on the politicians. An honorary league member, Governor Nelson Rockefeller, ordered New York state law enforcement to cease using the terms mafia and Cosa Nostra. Attorney General John Mitchell issued a similar order to the Justice Department. The politicians caved easily, leaving Colombo to take on Hollywood big shot Al Rudy, who was in the midst of producing the film version of Mario Puzo's The Godfather, an epic depicting the 3 Corleone brothers battling the 5 families of the New York City underworld. Puzo's best-selling novel had the makings of a blockbuster, but angry locals and threats of union walkouts plagued location shooting in East Harlem and Little Italy. To fix the problem, a sit-down was arranged between Al Rudy and 1,500 League delegates, some booing, in the Grand Ballroom of the Park Sheraton Hotel on February 25, 1971. Insisting his film wasn't about negative mafioso stereotypes, but poor immigrants faced with prejudice. Rudy explained that the bad guys weren't even all Italian. Take Captain McCluskey, the crooked Irish cop, or Solozzo, the wily Turk who was good with a knife. "How about a good kid from Bensonhurst?" asked Colombo. Rudy got the picture. Colombo picked Godfather extras from the cheering crowd. Shuttling between the sidewalk of FBI headquarters, Madison Avenue, and Cantalupo Realty, Colombo prepared to do God's work on the next man who dared defame him. This time no pushover from Washington or Hollywood, but Crazy Joe Gallo. Alarms sounded across South Brooklyn, warning of Crazy Joe's imminent return from the joint. "He'd break up a high mass if he felt like it," said a detective on the pizza squad. "Inside of a week, that guy could destroy everything that had been done over a couple of years." The running joke in the Colombo family was that Joey was going to start making black buttons in the Gallo gang, using his black nationalist prison connections to build an army of number runners and heroin pushers in the largely black neighborhood of Bed-Stuy. Nobody knew what Crazy Joe was capable of, not even Kid Blast, who drove out to Sing Sing to pick up his older brother, savoring his last moments as the acting head of the Gallo gang. Following Blast on backup, with an itchy trigger finger, was Bobby Borriello of the bell-bottomed Borriello brothers. During the Gallo-Profazzi War, Bobby stood on a milk crate as a lookout on President Street. "A kid that could break your heart," said Detective Bartles. Now a husky teenager, Bobby led the Mod Squad, a pack of pot-smoking wild boys, ready to raise hell at the release of Crazy Joe, the living legend of Red Hook. In the kitchen of her 4th Avenue rooming house in Flatbush, Mary prepared for Joey. "Put some weight on him, Mama," said Pete the Greek. "He needs it. Give him lots of pasta." Up in the attic, Jeffy picked out the right lingerie in front of the mirror, something sexy and funky to accompany Sly and the Family Stone on the turntable. She wanted everything to be just right after living on Joey's letters. Her daughter, Joey, had only known her father as a prisoner. A crowd waited on Mary's porch. Hundreds lined up to touch Joey's face and hold his hand. NYPD prowlers jammed the block, ready for Blast to pull up with the hood. Joey emerged, thin and pale, as she had 10 years before in Manhattan Sessions Court when she kissed his manacled hands. Mary wept. "All right," said Joey. "I'm home. Let's cut out the bullshit crying. Just show me what's there to eat." Joey sat at the table, performing for visitor after visitor, wisecracking like the good old days. His mother served round the clock, cooking, muttering under her breath as she stirred the sauce. "Listen, baby," asked Jeffy, "why don't you cool it? She's an old lady. She's tired." "Ah, she loves it," said Joey. Al Lettieri, the square-jawed Sicilian who had left the San Remo years before to become an artist, stopped by with a bottle of Dom. In town for The Godfather, he was playing a role he could finally sink his teeth into. Sollozzo, the Turk, the tough narcotics dealer. Jean showed, too, that nutty cat girl who on a snowy night told Joey over a bottle of brandy in a village dive that he needed to paint, write, sing, dance. She hadn't given up. "You must write a book while it's fresh on your mind," she insisted. Jean told him that his book needed to be serious, drawing from his vast reading in prison, his letters and poetry, his ideas on art and his philosophies of life. Nothing cheap, nothing sensational, nothing having to do with crime. "Yeah," said Joey. "Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it." He told his parole officer that he was thinking about a play based on his prison years, something like Jean Genet's Dark Tales of Prison, where beauty grew from the underbelly. He could get across an important statement, conveying his strong belief that most inmates were mentally ill patients who needed to be under psychiatric care. Something like the hit play Marat Sade, set in an asylum, exposing the system's hypocrisy. Determined to settle down and write, Joey moved into an 8th-floor, fully carpeted apartment in a doorman building on West 14th Street in Union Square, just north of the Village. He took long walks to catch up on the life he'd missed, digging the fruits of women's lib, the braless chicks in Washington Square Park. "Greek, Greek," he said, jabbing his bodyguard. "Look at that one. Mamma mia, look at those boobies bouncing." Joey took his daughter to see the violent and bloody Bonnie and Clyde, playing at the St. Mark's Cinema. He walked past the remains of the townhouse on West 11th Street that had been accidentally blown up by the weathermen, a revolutionary cadre of spoiled blue bloods who couldn't even wire a bomb. "It was all different," said the Greek, "like his fucking pants were different. I'd ask him when he was going to get with it. He'd say, 'Don't give me none of that jive talk, Greek.'" On 14th Street, Joey ran into Detective Bartle's son, a good-looking kid who worked as a sales clerk at Barney's men's department on Madison Avenue. "Barney's?" asked Joey with a smile, furling his fingers into a fist, wondering if the kid would pick up on the gesture. Did he want to lift some swag? The kid declined. Jeffy updated Joey with a collection of chic menswear. Joey gave it all away to the Mod Squad. He thought the groovy shirts were for fags and hated how the pants weren't pleated, leaving no place to put his balls. He settled on a leather jacket, a peaked felt cap, and toned-down bell-bottoms, but wouldn't budge on his music. Jeffy hit up Umberto for $100 to buy all the great records Joey missed out on. Blonde on Blonde, The White Album, Let It Bleed. Joey wanted Bing Crosby and Miles Davis. He hated Jeffy's records, especially Chestnut Mare by the Byrds, co-written with Jacques Levy. The title song was about a wild horse free from the reins that shackled men to a desk and a dental plan. "I don't want to hear any fags singing about any fucking horse," snapped Joey. "It's not about a fucking horse," said Jeffy. "If you listen, it's about life." Jeffy put it on while Joey was in the tub, hoping it would relax him. Sopping wet and naked, he grabbed the record off the player and tossed it down the incinerator in the hall. Joey had a hard time easing into the 70s, unlike his little brother, Blast, whose mutton chops and big Elvis shades made him look like the next James Taylor. Blast took it easy while Joey was away. For Columbo's birthday, Blast got the Gallos to park a truck on 86th Street and wheel out a new golf cart. The Don was a big shot at the public golf course in Diker Park. Returning the favor at Christmas, Columbo handed out ties on President Street. Everybody got the same one. Even Agent Welsh gave Blast the upraised brow. You get him a golf cart, and he gives you ties? Blast played it cool. He was too cautious to go shoot up the boss, despite Columbo having failed his promise to spread the bread around. This distracted Joey to no end, just as he was settling down to write. Had that cocksucker good, seethed Joey, remembering the days when he had held Columbo hostage. Had him in my hands. Should have killed him then. Just knew I should have killed him then. The only love Joey had gotten from Columbo was an envelope holding $1,000 in cash to help fund his welcome-back dinner. No personal visit, no overdue concessions from the Gallo Profazzi settlement, not a penny of the millions Columbo made off his Italian-American Civil Rights League. At the Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street, the League sold numero uno buttons for $10 and Italian flag buttons for $5. Sinatra's concert at the Felt Forum raised $500,000 for the League. Thousands sent $10 dues to the head office. Burly League reps canvassed the luncheonettes and pizza parlors of South Brooklyn for heartfelt donations. Joey could handle getting squeezed out of the action. That was what happened to Gallows. But when Columbo sent his capos, Rocco Miraglia and Gallo turncoat Nick Bianco, in a gold Buick station wagon to President Street to demand that Joey put up posters for their upcoming Unity Day rally on Gallo turf, "Grease the pistols," Joey told the Mod Squad. "The move is on." Joey tore up the posters, kicked the capos off President Street, and told them that the only reason he let them live was to deliver a message to that fucking queer Columbo: no League paraphernalia on Gallo territory. Hell-bent on destroying the League, Joey, the former revolutionary turned anti-civil rights reactionary, waged a counter-revolutionary propaganda blitzkrieg. Taking the offensive, Gallows ripped off Unity Day posters hanging along Court Street and announced to Red Hook that the only interests the League represented were Columbo's own. Business owners were ordered to keep their shops open during the rally and not to insult the Italian people by letting employees go. "Usually store owners felt they were caught in the middle," said the Greek, "that if they didn't attend, Columbo's people would come down on them, and if they did, we would. The answer was simple. We were a lot closer than the Columbos." Stoned and psyched to go to the mattresses, the Mod Squad barricaded President Street. They played slapball on the block and dug out a huge outdoor pool in a vacant lot across from the Longshore restroom. The gang mixed concrete, trying hard not to get it on their fine Italian loafers, but didn't pour it level, leaving the surface lopsided. Neighborhood kids splashed around in the day. At night, the grill in the Hawaiian gazebo sizzled. The chippies came, romanced poolside under the starry skies of Red Hook. On dog days, bell-bottomed Bobby Borriello chunked cantaloupes down President Street and aimed the fire hose at Mondo the Midget, shooting him off the ground and up the brick wall. Stuffing a huge can full of fireworks, Bobby set it in the middle of the street and lit it up. Bottle rockets and cherry bombs blasted and shot all over the block. Like old times, Umberto was happy again to cook big pots of spaghetti, excited at the prospect of being a big shot now that his sons were taking on Columbo. He tipped off FBI agent Welsh on a secret of good cooking: always put oranges in the salad. Welsh became a fixture on President Street, sitting around and eating with the boys, figuring that if he got on good terms with them, he might be able to turn one as an informant. Joey told him to forget it. Nobody was squealing for nobody, but Joey said he appreciated how nice Welsh had been to his mother. Closely observing, Welsh thought Joey was a character, a little like Tommy Udo, a lot like Frank Gorshin, the twitchy comedian who played the Riddler in the campy television series Batman, the Gallo's favorite show. A trickster at heart, Joey claimed to have something up his sleeve for Columbo's upcoming Unity Day. Nobody knew what, but shortly before the big rally, Joey pulled aside Agent Welch and asked, concerned, "Bernie, you're not going to be out there that day, are you?" He was. "Then be careful. I hear there's going to be a stampede that day." Columbo stepped out of his chauffeured Buick at Columbus Circle. He unbuttoned his white, short-sleeved shirt at the collar. An electric organ ground out a melody. Plastic streamers in red, white, and green stretched from the Columbus statue to the lampposts around the southwest corner of Central Park. 250,000 people were expected to turn out for the second annual Unity Day. Thousands had already arrived early. Old men in plastic straw hats waved miniature Italian flags. Girls in hot pants with "Kiss Me, I'm Italian" buttons gave the upraised index finger of Italian power. Plainclothes detectives scanned the crowd for trouble. Columbo told the NYPD he didn't want a lot of uniformed cops. He wanted to keep it festive. Columbo family bodyguards stuck guns under their summer shirts, although it was hard to miss the bulges. Columbo took a look at the day's schedule resting by the speaker stand, covered in red, white, and blue bunting. Mr. America was going to flex. Dozens of photographers surrounded Columbo. A young, lanky, black man in a polo shirt bobbed toward him 30 feet away with a Bolex movie camera. He wore a big watch and gold rings. "Watch him," directed Columbo. The movie bug infected this young man, Jerome Johnson. He had left his home in New Brunswick for a stint in Hollywood. He wanted to be a filmmaker. As he drifted along the Sunset Strip, his good looks and reefer connections turned him on to the right people and hippie chicks willing to take him into their bungalows. He seduced them with astrology pickup lines and a book of poetry, which he showed the LAPD when they picked him up early one morning, wandering outside the palaces of Beverly Hills. He said he was visiting a woman. She'd given him the book as a gift. The cops told him never to step foot in the hills again. After 2 years in California, Jerome returned home to New Brunswick, where he cruised the Rutgers campus in the back seat of a rented Cadillac limo with a chauffeur. A smooth operator, he gave co-eds at the student union his business card, Johnson Productions, Inc. One 200-pound blonde put him up for a bit, claiming, "He was the best lover I ever had, on a technical basis. He was hung like an elephant." After spreading his seed at Rutgers, Johnson found himself around Harvard in the summer of 1971. A wooden scimitar dangling from his belt, he leaned down to a redhead reading under a tree and said, "I'm a male witch. Can I tell your fortune?" She took him to her commune. He hung around for a few days, smoked reefer, and talked films. He'd been an extra in a village art film directed by Hauser. The commune got tired of listening to Johnson go on and on. He split to Canada, where a hospital administrator picked him up on a wooded road in Medicine Hat. Johnson talked about his production company and the ins and outs of making films in New York, Hollywood, and Canada. Swinging down to Philly, he crashed at the pad of his man, Van Kirksey, a black actor who had roles in Uptight and Cotton Comes to Harlem. On Sunday evening, June 27th, Johnson took a bus up to Port Authority in Manhattan. He lived on and off with a Slavic girl on Christopher Street, but kept his things in a spare room in the Perfumed Gardens, a massage parlor in the Chelsea Hotel, and a bare studio on Elizabeth Street. That was where he kept his trunk. Inside were a few feathers, an astrology book, an incense box, and a picture of him dressed up like a cowboy. Rather than go to his studio, he decided to stay with a friend of his, a black actress who lived in the village. He showed up at her door with a yellowish spider monkey he kept in a cage. She was busy rehearsing a role. Johnson asked her if she wanted to have dinner. She already had plans. Johnson said that was fine with him. "I got work to do anyway. Got to get myself together for an important job tomorrow." "Doing what?" "I'm going to shoot Columbo." On June 28th, the morning of the rally, Johnson showed his League press card to security, allowing him access into the inner circle around the Columbus statue. With him was his assistant, whom the police later identified as either a woman or a man in drag. She had a mid-size afro and great curves, which she showed off in tight clothes, from varying accounts either blue jeans, slacks, or a miniskirt. Columbo's bodyguards checked her out. A powder horn dangled from her hip. She packed a black German Menta automatic made in World War I. 15 feet from Columbo, Johnson crouched down to get a good shot. The gears of his Bolex movie camera turned. "Hi, Mr. Columbo," said the girl. She smiled. Johnson kept the Bolex to his eye as he unloaded 3 bullets into Columbo's head. "They got Joe!" A pile jumped on top of Johnson. Somebody fired 3 shots into Johnson's back, killing him instantly, and walked away clean. The camera assistant slipped past the cops. Columbo's bodyguards raged through the crowd, attacking blacks at random. A gang of 6 jumped on a guy with a mohawk and 2 axe handles under his belt, a guitar player who was to perform that day. "Kill him!" screamed the onlookers. An ambulance rushed off Columbo. A spokesman for BRAT, the Black Revolutionary Attack Team, called the Associated Press, claiming, "We have just assassinated Joe Columbo. It is only the beginning. White people will continue to pay for their crimes against black people." Joe's son, Anthony, called a press conference, denying any conspiracy. "It was the act of one maniac acting alone. This is what they do now to all civil rights leaders." Outside Roosevelt Hospital, where Columbo lay in a coma, FBI agents searched his bodyguard, Vinnie Vingo. "I hope you're doing this to the gallows, too," snapped Vingo, "because they shot Joe Columbo." Columbo comes out of his coma. He asks for something to drink, and he sees the bottle of wine at his bedside, made by Ernest and Giulio, the Gallo brothers. Columbo goes right back into a coma again. Crazy Joe giggled at his own joke, telling it to anyone who'd listen. He rolled his crazy Riddler eyes when Agent Welsh pulled him aside for a chat. "My God," said Welsh, "that's unbelievable. How do you think you're going to get away?" To have a black man shoot Columbo was like Joey leaving a calling card, as former New York Times reporter Nicholas Gage put it. The Daily News splashed a picture of Joey alongside Jerome Johnson with the caption, "Befriended blacks in prison." Joey said Columbo had it coming for making himself a celebrity, a ready-made target for any crazed nut, but denied having anything to do with it. "I couldn't top that," he told Welsh, laughing it off. The NYPD was not taking chances. A second incarnation of the old pizza squad was dispatched 24/7 to President Street in the aftermath of the shooting. Plainclothesmen kept watch on Joey's apartment on 14th Street, jam-packed with foot traffic, a bitch for surveillance. To keep Joey from causing any more trouble on President Street, his parole officer reminded him that it was a violation to associate with known criminals, but Joey still snuck down to President Street for early morning visits. The cops slacked off after a while. They weren't too worried if one hood popped off another. Pal Joey. In the summer of 1971, Joe Columbo rolled out the red carpet for The Godfather. His men ensured that Staten Islanders wouldn't disturb the filming of the lavish wedding scene. A few blocks from President Street, the Gallo gang heckled the low-budget MGM production of The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, inspired by columnist Jimmy Breslin's reporting of the Gallo-Profazzi War, showcasing a group of ragtag gangsters, including a pet lion and Beppo, the dwarf. "Smile pretty for the camera, motherfuckers," yelled Mondo the midget, heckling his counterpart, Hervé Villachez, a dwarf dubbed over to give him a tough Brooklyn accent. Joey's fictionalized on-screen debut wasn't the honorable Michael Corleone, stepping up to the mantle of Don to obey his family duty, or the psychotic killer Tommy Udo stalking the night in search of kicks. It was a bumbling hood named Kid Sally Palumbo. Right after the December 1971 release of The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, Joey got a visit from former Pizza Squad detective Eddie Lambert, who told Joey that he'd met Jerry Orbach, the guy who played Kid Sally. Bronx-born with great hair, Jerry played the type of characters that Joey usually went for. Mac the Knife in the Threepenny Opera, and gambler Sky Masterson in the gangster musical Guys and Dolls, making it all the more difficult to accept Jerry's stint on the big screen as Kid Sally, a real jerk-off. A sit-down was scheduled for the Queen Restaurant, a Gallo hangout on Court Street. "It appealed to me," Jerry told the New York Post, "because I wanted to find out how right or wrong I had portrayed the man. I found out that I had been very wrong because in the story he had been a boob, a clown, and this was a very intelligent man." "Hey, Punchy," said Joey, calling one of the boys over to the table. "You see the one over there? With the white? That's the guy that played me in the movie. You know what? We should have broke his legs, just to teach him to be a better actor." Joey asked Jerry's tall and voluptuous wife, Marta, if she preferred Camus or Sartre. Marta almost fell into a plate of spaghetti, she told the press. "I said I preferred Camus," Marta revealed to famed columnist Earl Wilson. "Joey said he thought Camus was suicidal and Joey liked survivors. I challenged him on Camus being suicidal. He referred to the auto accident in which Camus was killed and said that anybody who went in a car with somebody driving that fast was suicidal." "Listen, Italian girl," said Joey, "someday I'm going to come over and I'm going to eat your goddamn spaghetti. Will your actor be there? Will you be there, actor?" "I realized I hadn't had spaghetti on Sunday since I lived with my father and grandmother," Marta told the Post. "Joey was Neapolitan and I'm Sicilian, and even though the Neapolitans and Sicilians may hate each other, they understand each other." "There's a corner of Italian background in me," Marta told Time, "that was ready to be activated. The first day I laid eyes on Joey, it was like being with my father. Joey sensed it, and my family sensed it. After that, we were with him almost every day, and if we didn't see him, he'd call up and ask where the hell we were." Joey forged a friendship with the Orbachs over late nights in their spacious Chelsea brownstone. Quoted by Society columnist Charlotte Curtis in a feature for Harper's Bazaar, "The Last Delicious Days of Joey Gallo," Marta revealed how Joey opened up in her all-electric kitchen. "He'd sit around my kitchen with those sad, sad eyes. He wanted to talk about things, everything." "You don't understand, Mama," said Joey. "I gotta get off." Sitting in the Orbach's kitchen, where restaurant-size pots and pans hung from the brick wall and the occasional Smithfield ham hung from the ceiling, Joey knew he needed to get his kicks, to plug into the thing that made life worth living. He'd run the gamut, from jazz impresario to hash-smoking beatnik to fiery revolutionary, but all he got was 10 years in the can and a pack of hitmen on him. "Joey compressed time with us," said Jerry, because he knew in the back of his head that he might not have much time, that he could go at any minute. Consequently, a minute spent talking to Joey was like an hour spent with someone else. Joey told Jerry he didn't like it when Marta talked like a man because then he'd have to treat her like a man. He didn't want to stop treating her like a woman. "Joey was a terribly sexy person," Marta told Time, saying that Joey called her Mama, or sometimes the big job. He once told her to shut up, but "In our family, in our world," said Marta, "women are bright, and they talk too," and he began to understand. Getting hip to the ways of society, Joey hit the town with the Orbachs. His social debut was on a snowy night at actor Ben Gazzara's dinner party. Joey told former Copa girl Janice Rule how much the boys in the can enjoyed her flicks. Lounge singer and piano man Buddy Greco showed up in a pair of knickers. "Jesus Christ," said Joey. "You've been singing for 35 years. What kind of an outfit is that?" Greco invited Joey to his opening at the St. Regis. Joey took his mother to Sardi's. He was ready to assume his place on the wall with the rest of the caricatures. "Do you know anyone who steals dogs?" asked Marta. "What kind of dog do you want?" asked Joey. Joey called on Mrs. Peters Stone, the wife of the famous playwright, at her ritzy apartment. Somebody had kidnapped her dog. Joey pegged her as the victim of a dog-napping ring. He sent the Greek to comb seedy Times Square to find the pooch. Mrs. Stone thanked Joey with comp tickets to her husband's new Broadway show, Sugar. At the opening night of Night Watch, Joey watched actress Joan Hackett play a stuttering socialite whose husband was driving her insane so he could run off with her money. Joey sent her a big floral arrangement with an attached card. "Dear Joan, you're a good broad." "Broad is a word I would never accept from anybody but Joe," said Joan. Joey phoned Joan's sunny Central Park West apartment to chat, interrupting her wine and omelet lunch with New York Times reporter Guy Flatley, who added Joey to his puff piece on Joan. An ex-convict whose miraculous transformation from underworld figure to self-made super-philosopher has captured Joan's fancy. "Everyone talked about it," said Mrs. Richard Clurman, socialite. "It was the thing to do. You'd go somewhere, and people would say, 'Have you met Joey Gallo?' And it was like Stravinsky or Yevtushenko. If you hadn't met him, you weren't in." "Our relationship has been described as like Hemingway hanging out with bullfighters or Mailer hanging out with prize-fighters," Marta told the New York Post. "But this is obscene because we weren't role-playing. We hung out with Joey because we thought he was such a great person." On Sunday afternoons, the Orbachs hosted invitation-only brunches, wanting their closest friends to meet Joey. "When we entertain," Jerry told the Post, "we go for a loose, informal dinner and a poker game upstairs afterward." Marta set the tone in jeans and an old sweater. Instead of Jerry's famed egg, ham, and cheese bake, it was spaghetti, just how the guest of honor liked it. Everybody sat at the big table, sipped red wine, and picked at the green salad. Joey sat at the poker table and eyeballed the playwright, Neil Simon. He sat on the white brocade sofa and made outrageous statements in leisurely political debates. He dug President Nixon almost as much as LBJ, a tough guy who had a real set of balls. "He was as bright and interesting as people said," remarked socialite D.D. Ryan. "He'd done a lot of thinking. It was nice to talk to someone who had the time to think." Joey held court at the table in the back left corner of Elaine's on the Upper East Side and gave proprietress Elaine Kaufman the eye lock, she remembered. The spot for Manhattan's who's who, from filmmaker Woody Allen to Joey's new pals, Ben Gazzara and novelist Bruce J. Friedman. Elaine's was the after-hours home for the literary elite, a place to rub elbows with Gay Talese, dapper author of the recent bestseller Honor Thy Father, his portrait of New York City's underworld as seen through the Bonanno family, with mentions of the Gallo brothers. After a few drinks, the warm glow and the book jackets by the bathroom made an aspiring writer like Joey feel that he'd already made it, that he deserved to be in the company of heavyweights like Norman Mailer, who had already inched in on Joey's creative turf. In the late 1960s, Mailer and his two pals hung out in a village dive, drinking and carousing while pretending to be gangsters. "We go into bars and do fights or wild conversations and let whatever happens happen," Mailer told Verite filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker. "You can see it's brutal, but when we get it right, it's going someplace. We're the Gallo brothers now. We've been hiding out." Mailer put the act on film, resulting in the underground art house romp Wild 90. "After a few moments, one begins to long for the Gallo brothers," said New York Times critic Renata Adler. Joey needed to get in on the action. He mulled over that prison black comedy he wanted to do. Shortly before Christmas, he said he had to get his head straight before getting down to work, but it wasn't easy to settle into a writing routine with Columbo's hitmen after him. Joey figured he could make it happen with Marta's help. At an Orbach brunch, Joey spilled his spaghetti on Viking publisher Thomas Ginsberg. Ginsberg gave him a book deal. Joey brought his bodyguards for the meet at Viking Press. "There's something suicidal about publishers," he told the Greek, "paying a lot of greens for the big nothing." Some days Joey went to the Chelsea townhouse. Other days Marta arrived at his Union Square pad. Joey wanted the book to be a darkly comic work of fiction based around a convict named Slick. Telling Marta about his own prison life, he said all of the stories about his recruiting a black gang in Auburn were a myth, something to shake up the boys in Brooklyn. Joey pointed at the tall buildings outside his window, perfect position for a sniper. "Hey, that's the Texas Book Depository," said Marta. "Finally, you know what it's like to try to stay alive," said Joey. An MGM production exec reportedly came to Joey's apartment to discuss the script version of what had been tentatively titled A Block. In A Block, Joey pitched to A.H. Weiler, New York Times film critic, the central character comes out on top in every situation and is actually comfortable in a prison environment. The film will be a spoof of authentic prison conditions, not an exposé. We've had enough of them. I'm very sentimental about my teeth, said Joey, because they saved my life a few times. He didn't use them much around Jeffy. She never cooked. His mother thought she was starving him. Umberto came up to Joey's apartment to stash boxes of food, bought wholesale, dozens of steaks and pork chops, and 18 bags of fruit. I can't, Pop, snapped Jeffy. You don't understand. I can't take it anymore. I can't. He's going to drive me insane. I don't want it. Where am I going to put all this fucking food? Joey got in the habit of going up for dinner at Sina's penthouse, 2 floors above Joey. Sina worked on the main floor at the dentist's office. Joey had come in with bone damage. Sina had a nice spread, wall-to-wall carpeting, a brand-new bookcase, a new armoire. Joey reportedly tried to saw off an end of it so the TV would fit. On Christmas Eve, Joey had a big tree brought up from the peddlers on the street. Carols played on the hi-fi as Joey decorated it with tinsel. He went 2 floors down to get out of a previous engagement. Jeffy opened her present, a zodiac charm with an inlaid diamond, indulging her interest in astrology. It was the wrong sign. The doomed couple ended up screaming at each other. "Fuck you," said Jeffy, "and fuck Christmas." Joey took back his present and went upstairs. He took Sina and her daughter out for dinner with Umberto. They went to midnight mass. Joey wanted to celebrate Christmas Eve that way forever. Kid Blast didn't have any use for showbiz people or their ilk, but Joey's absences from President Street put him in the hot seat on sit-downs, giving him a chance to command his own carefully tailored brand of diplomacy, taken from the best of his brothers. Larry always had a rep as a straight shooter, strictly business in a perfectly knotted black tie, a sensible guy you could deal with. Blast updated the look with a brown double-breasted blazer. He slicked back his long hair and trimmed his thick sideburns below the ears, courtesy of a barber he brought onto President Street. His nails were immaculate. The wild blood streaking through Joey flowed through Blast, but no one knew for sure what wheeled behind his Elvis shades. Blast worked the unpredictability card to advantage in the Colombo peace negotiations, ongoing, like President Nixon's strategy to end the war in Vietnam, the madman theory. According to informants, while sitting in the back of Roy Roy's, a President Street social club, in November 1971, Blast laid it out for Gallo-turned-Colombo, Nick Bianco. Peace had a price. $150,000, the share of greens that the Gallos had been cheated out of since Larry's death. Bianco said it was impossible. Blast said it was fine. The Gallos didn't want to make peace anyway. The word was that Joey was making 100 or 200 button men in the Gallo gang, including blacks and Puerto Ricans, which meant that the Colombos lived in fear of not knowing from which way they'd be killed. Bianco left President Street wondering just how crazy the Gallos were. Blast kept him on his toes, but insiders didn't expect the Colombos to break out the guns. As one Gallo source leaked to the FBI, top guys in the Colombo family were happy to see Joe Colombo out of the picture, and anyone thinking about moving against the Gallo crew at this time has to be made aware the Gallo faction will respond forcefully. All the Gallos wanted was to be left alone, free to control their strip of Brooklyn and run it for themselves with no hassles. There was only one obstacle: Junior Persico, the last legitimate force to deal with in the family. In the latest tangle, a Gallo shot Junior's bodyguard, Apples, in the gut. Apples had a load of liquor in him and wouldn't go down, hanging on until he got dumped in front of a Coney Island hospital, where he lasted through to recovery. Months later, on January 24th, 1972, Apples was finally put down. Not by the Gallos, but feds, who threw him in the big house in Atlanta for 6 years as a co-conspirator on the old Akers job, ending a decade of hung juries, delayed sentences, mistrials, and appeals in one of the longest-running cases in the history of the Eastern District of New York. Junior went with him. This time, the slick lawyers fell through on Junior's appeal, rejected by the court on March 15, 1972, with the statement that the defendant's attempt to demonstrate prosecutorial misconduct is frivolous and that a new trial need not be granted. For a truck full of cheap linen, Junior got 14 years. The Gallos were home free. On March 16th, the Orbachs hosted Joey and Sina's wedding at their Chelsea townhouse. The ring was a $400 diamond job from Cartier. The wedding cake had an enormous front piece of the bride and groom. Columnist Earl Wilson sent one of his guys down from the Post to cover the event. Reverend William Glenisk of the Village Presbyterian Church performed the ceremony. Young and handsome, with black short-cropped hair, his notable gigs included the sublime eulogy of Lenny Bruce. He was a man, uptight against an artificial world, who shattered its faces and its hypocrisy. And the absurd marriage ceremony of village folkie Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky, performed in front of a live television audience on the Johnny Carson show. At the last minute, Joey decided he didn't want his driver, Cousin Tony, to be the best man. He wanted David Steinberg, the famous comedian. Cousin Tony didn't bother sticking around. Alan Jones, a tenor who played the straight man in 2 Marx Brothers films, sang a rendition of the Lord's Prayer. Sina wore a simple white dress. Joey wore a double-breasted gray suit with a polka-dot tie. "Do you, Nina, take this man?" "No, not Nina. Sina. "Let's do it again." "Are we married yet?" "No, not yet." "God is a tough customer," cracked Joey. He had tears in his eyes after the service. "You made a Christian out of me," he told Alan Jones. "I got religious hearing you sing that." The following evening, Joey looked onto the Hudson River from the window of Alan's apartment on the west side. He talked about all the years he lost staring across a prison yard. On Saturday night, Joey took Sina and his mother out to the San Susan nightclub in Mineola, Long Island. Joey wanted to hear Jimmy Rosselli, old-school Hoboken crooner. Fans called him Mozart to Sinatra's Salieri. Rosselli sold records from the back of his car on Mulberry Street, unwilling to bow down to the mob to get famous. Joey heckled Rosselli throughout the act. He got sloppy drunk and gave big, wet kisses. Sitting at the other end of the bar were a few of the guys from President Street. Nobody in the gang congratulated him on his wedding. None of the Gallos had much of anything to say to Joey that night. It was daylight by the time Joey let the Greek chauffeur him home to Union Square. Rosselli at the San Susan had been enough to give him a big hangover. He stared at the morning headline under the Godfather ad in the New York Times. The Orbachs, Pal Joey. 2 weeks later, on Monday, April 3rd, Voices opened its Broadway previews at the Ethel Barrymore Theater. The play starred Jerry's stepdaughter, Lisa, making big headway as a child actor. The Orbachs booked a table at Sardi's to celebrate the opening. Joey didn't feel like going. Outside the Ethel Barrymore, under the lights of Broadway, Joey smoked with his back to the wall and waited for his driver to pick him up and take him home. 2 days later, the doorman buzzed Sina's penthouse. Delivery in the lobby. Sina said to send him up. Joey flipped out. He posted Pete the Greek outside the elevator. The doors slid open. The Greek pulled a gun and choked the delivery man. He handed over the package. It was a Tiffany ice bucket from Bruce J. Friedman, whose sons had played pool with Joey at the Orbach's brunch. Joey screamed at Sina for being so stupid. He threw her in a chair. Sina didn't intend to take the shit Jeffy had put up with. "If this is what my life with you is going to be," she said, "you have to leave." Joey couldn't move back downstairs. It was a wreck. Joey had torn up the wall-to-wall carpet with his bare hands to send back to Jeffy, along with all of the furniture. Whacked. Opening night at the Copa, and he knocked him dead on his first set, like Martin and Lewis in the old days. The greats. They didn't make guys like that anymore, but Don Rickles was no slouch. They called him the Merchant of Venom, Mr. Warmth. He got ready for the second act when a couple of tough guys approached him backstage with a message. The boss was in the audience tonight. The boss had a sensitive nature. Rickles had a rep for being insensitive. Fine with the boss, so long as Rickles didn't fling any of that funny stuff in his direction. Any seasoned performer at the Copa knew the stakes on underworld characters. Those who didn't could look to that time when Jerry Lewis was working the bar crowd in between shows. A big guy with a bull chest, who didn't think Jerry was all that funny, growled, "Why don't you knock off that shit and shut the fuck up?" Jerry cracked a zinger comeback. "That's what happens when cousins get married." The big guy told Jerry he'd knock out his teeth. Dean Martin promptly apologized for his partner Jerry, who was a little green to the rule. Never joke with the boys from the syndicate, especially when the guy was the hated and feared Albert Anastasia, the butcher of Brooklyn. Only Rickles had an irreverent streak. He thought about what the tough guys had told him and figured, that's like painting a bullseye on yourself. A guy sits in the front row smoking a big cigar and surrounded by 5 bodyguards, and I'm supposed to ignore him? Fuck him. He was the Mad Emperor of comedy, a bullet-headed matador. He stepped into the ring and took his applause. The joint was packed with who's who's, nightlife maven Earl Wilson, actor Jerry Orbach, comedian David Steinberg. Rickles worked over the room, first the Jews, then the blacks. He scanned ringside for big cigars. Out there with some showbiz types was flat-topped Punchy. At another table was Russ Bufalino, boss of Erie, Pennsylvania. Rickles looked up to the long table on the top terrace and grinned. As Pete the Greek remembered, "I was told to be very careful what I said," cracked Rickles, "particularly to those people on the upper balcony." Everybody looked up. There was Crazy Joe Gallo in a blue pinstriped suit, flanked by bodyguards, and his wife and sister. Joey hadn't been to the Copa in 10 years, since his shotgun wedding road trip kickoff party, but they still treated him like a king. The maitre d' gave him the best table. Busboys cleared the chicken chow mein. The manager sent over champagne, which was polished off quick. Joey grabbed the empty bottle from the ice bucket and stood up like he was going to hurl it on stage. Rickles covered his balding head with his arms and cowered. "Ma! Ma!" The crowd roared. Christ, he was good. Joey couldn't stop laughing the whole set. Rickles brought down the house. Joey's stepdaughter Lisa worked the floor. She'd been announced as one of the in-house celebrities tonight, fresh off her smashed debut on Broadway in Voices. She thanked Earl Wilson for mentioning her in his New York Post column on her stepfather. "Oh, is Joey Gallo here?" asked Midnight Earl's wife. It was 2 a.m. and getting late, but she always wanted to meet a real gangster. Lisa took them up to the balcony to join the table, celebrating with cake and more champagne. "I know all about you," said Joey. "You're the BW." That was Earl's term for the beautiful wife. The BW noticed the big mole on his left cheek. "Why, you're a diplomat," she said. Joey had learned about the BW when he went to Earl's office weeks before to talk about his future as a writer. He told Earl that his old life on President Street was over. "I'll never go back there. I think there's nothing out there for me but death." Tonight, Joey told Wilson he'd be willing to spill the beans on the present mob scene, which would be a scorcher given the Godfather hype. "Tell your secretary to call me and we'll make an appointment. I don't like to talk on the phone." A bottle got sent from a showbiz table. The cork popped. Joey drank up. Bubbles fizzled up the flute. The party moved to the round bar at the lounge. More champagne was sent over by the Irishman, 6'4" and balding. He was a dangerous guy, the muscle on Erie boss Bufalino, who came over to say hi to Joey. A diamond-inlaid numero uno button twinkled on his lapel. "What are you doing with that?" cracked Joey. "You really believe in that bullshit league?" Bufalino didn't think Joey was very funny. He walked away. The Irishman took Joey's arm. "Joey, that's nothing to talk about here. Let's have a few drinks." Yeah, we'll have a few drinks. Joey, he's a boss. So he's a boss, so am I a boss. That make him any better than me? We're all equal. We're all supposed to be brothers. The Greek stopped him before it got worse. Joey, let's go to the table. Let's not have a beef. Joey followed the Greek to the table with the girls. Edie, the Greek's girl, asked what was wrong. Nothing. We're all having a good time. Don Rickles came over with his mother. One time at the Copa, his mother told Joey, "The only way you can talk to my Don is if you put the guns on the table." 5 irons dropped on the table. They talked for almost an hour tonight. They talked about Larry. Joey asked if Rickles remembered what had happened at the old Elegante. It was getting late. About 4 in the morning. Busboys stacked up chairs. The place was clearing out. Joey told his other bodyguard, Bobby D., to take off and lay the broad he'd been angling. Jerry Orbach told David Steinberg he should come to the after party, but Joey's best man had a noon appointment to play basketball at the YMCA. He cut out early. Maybe Jerry did too. Things were getting a little fuzzy with all the champagne sent over. Joey invited Rickles, but Rickles said goodnight. He was a little nervous at the prospect of an early morning with Joey, given what happened at the old Elegante. Joey's entourage piled from the Copa into the Greek's black Cadillac, the windows pasted with black and orange stickers from the Americans of Italian Descent, a rival organization to Colombo's League. Joey had met its head, Congressman Santangelo, the week before to offer services to the Italian people. They swapped watches as a good faith token. Around 4:30, the Greek cruised down the FDR along the East River. Light rain wiped off the windshield. The Greek hoped Joey would change his mind, but Joey made him turn off downtown. He had his mind set on Su Ling's. "We just ate Chinese food," said the Greek. Wise guys had been hitting the spots for chow mein and scotch, but Joey insisted the Greek make the slow ride through Chinatown. Sanitation trucks cleared exotic garbage off the narrow streets. Yellow signs lit up Chinese characters at a few dive noodle houses. Su Ling's was closed. Joey told the Greek to hit Mulberry Street. "Luna's you want to go and eat at?" "Luna's, Greek." The crescent moon over the Luna was off, but Joey was hungry, leaving the Greek to figure out someplace else. He headed a few blocks north on Mulberry Street, quiet and dark, save a blue and white sign lighting up the corner of Hester. Umberto's Clam House. It looked a little like Luigi's Seafood and Cocktails in Kiss of Death, where psycho killer Tommy Udo, in his black suit, black shirt, and white tie, enjoyed a last meal before he stepped out under the lighted sign and got gunned down on the sidewalk. Umberto's was brand new, with big arched windows and a fresh whitewash. Joey's sister Carmela said it looked nice. "Ask if the broiled shrimps and scungilli are worth eating in this dump," said Joey. The Greek stopped the caddy and rolled down the window. He nodded to Matty the horse, standing in the drizzle. Next to the horse was a thick guy with a fat neck. The Greek asked about the scungilli. The horse saw Joey and the girls in the back seat. "Everything's good," said the horse. "Pull around the corner," said Joey. "Find a place to park." The Greek went around the block. A space opened up right in front of Hester Street. Umberto's gleamed with white tiles, brightly lit. Fishing nets and lifesavers hung on the wall. Crowded, given the hour, 5 in the morning. A collection of late-nighters sat at the square butcher block tables. 4 men in work clothes, an Asian couple, 2 college girls on spring break staying with family, a few night crawlers sitting at tables and the wooden bar stools at the clam bar. Joey walked the length of the restaurant to a table at the right rear so he could face the back door leading onto Mulberry. The Greek sat beside him, putting some flesh on his left. Sina sat directly across the table, her daughter to her right, close by the coat stand. Edie sat across from Carmela. They wore elegant, ankle-length jersey dresses. The college girl sitting behind them thought Sina was pretty. The waiter put down the bread and menus, then came back to take their orders. Joey turned around in the wooden captain's chair and jerked his thumb at the horse, sitting at the swivel bar stool. At his side was a big guy with bad skin. "Let him order for us," said Joey. "He'll know what's good. Right, Matty? You tell him what to bring." The horse didn't pay much notice. He ordered them boiled shrimp and scungili salad. Double orders. Sal, the cook, was pissed. A half hour until closing time. He was getting ready to pack up the clams and clean the fryer. Now he had to boil water, chop the parsley for the salad, squeeze on the lemon, and pour the oil. Plenty of garlic on the scungili. The table polished it off in a minute. Everybody was happy to be together after a great night out. The girls talked about how good the show was at the Copa. Joey said Rickles had come a long way, from a nobody at the Elegante to the headliner at the Copa. Joey wasn't a kid anymore, but 10 years in the joint had left him a lot of living still to do. He could write that book, the one he wanted. He'd take the book deal and run. He didn't have a thing to lose doing it his way. No ghostwriter. He read more than any Ivy League jockey. He had crazy ideas. His sister adored him. He had a gorgeous wife. His stepdaughter loved him like a father. She liked wearing his peaked cap around the apartment. The boys on President Street didn't need him. Copa ringside? Sour. They didn't even have the Copa girls anymore. He didn't need the brunches, the columns in the papers. He had everything he needed. He had a lot to live for. Joey ordered up a second helping for everyone and left to go take a leak. He made his way past the clam bar, down the black and white painted stairwell to a dark, cavernous cellar. Walking along the long corridor, he made his way to the men's room at the end. There were all kinds of doors that he couldn't figure out. He heard noises, rustling sounds, whispering. It didn't make any sense. Right in front of him was a huge metal door leading to a walk-in freezer. A guy could hide a lot of bodies in there. The place was like a tomb. Back upstairs, waiting for the food, Carmela leaned into the Greek. "I wonder what happened to him." Joey had been down in the John for 5 minutes already. "What do you suppose he's doing down there?" asked Sina. "Pete, why don't you take a look, see if he's okay?" "Oh, come on, leave him alone. Can't a guy even go to the men's room now, for Christ's sake?" "But why would he take so long? I don't like it, Pete. I think you ought to go down there." "Listen, Cam, I'm telling you, leave him alone. I know what I'm doing." Joey finally emerged from the stairwell. He looked pale. He wasn't smiling when he sat down. "Jesus," said Joey. "It's spooky down there." Carmela gave him a kiss on the cheek. "Well, happy birthday, brother." He was 43. The horse got up from his stool and headed for the kitchen. The guy with the pimples didn't move from the counter. The glass back door opened, and a man came in off Mulberry Street. It was 5:23 a.m. The college girl thought the man was handsome, distinctive, really tall. She looked down at her plate of seafood and heard a gunshot. Everybody in the place was ducking, the Greek, too. Joey jumped up and knocked his sister down to the floor, then flung the butcher block table on top of his wife and kid. Glasses and plates, bottles of ketchup and Umberto's hot sauce crashed on top of them, all huddled under the thick wooden shield. Lisa screamed. Sina kept her coat over Lisa's head and told her to act dead and not look up, no matter what happened. Joey drew fire away from the table by sprinting the length of the restaurant toward the front door. His left elbow shattered, and the bullet dropped in the lining of his pinstripes. Still running, bullets whizzed, chipping white cement off the walls. 2 shots went through his coattails as he passed the jukebox. Another got him in the lower spine. He opened the glass door, almost free. Then he got it in the back. Joey leaned against the black Cadillac, pushed himself off, and staggered out into the middle of the intersection of Hester and Mulberry. He dropped on his back. Carmela ran out to hold her brother's head in her lap. There was no sign of blood. Joey's eyes were wandering, but he breathed in gasps. 3 quarts of blood began filling up his chest, bleeding on the inside. This was it, the big finale. Carmela's screams caught the attention of a radio car that happened to be cruising down Hester Street. The prowler pulled up as the Greek tossed away his .25 caliber Titan automatic. He might as well not have had it. The hitman slipped off in a getaway car. The cop ran to the intersection and looked down at the mole on the left side of the victim's face. The guy looked a lot like Richard Widmark, or maybe the Riddler on Batman, maybe even a little like George Raft, or Jimmy Cagney. "Who is he?" asked the cop. "He looks familiar." "It's my brother," cried Carmela. "Joey Gallo. Joe Gallo." Joey's bright blue eyes glazed past his sister's tears toward the lighted signs of Umberto's. The Godfather. Chief of Detectives Albert Seidman received the news in an early morning call from his second-floor office on 240 Center Street. Joe Gallo just bought his at Umberto's clam house. "Any suspects?" "No, Chief." "Tell the detectives down there not to talk to the press. I'll make a statement when I get there." Chief Seidman put on his Fifth Avenue tailored button-down with the red cursive Al monogrammed on the cuff. The dark suit cut a block over his square shoulders, hiding the pearl-handled revolver. The onyx ring slid onto his right pinky. On his left ring finger, the diamond. Driving out of his ranch house in Nassau County, the chief lit his cigar and hit the Long Island Expressway toward Manhattan. The dirty city was going to pot, up to its eyeballs in urban guerrillas throwing Molotov cocktails, weathermen, and the soldiers from the Black Liberation Army who had taken credit for the killing of 2 cops outside an East Village luncheonette in January. Given the glut of nutcase radicals, it made sense that a faction of his detectives was convinced that black revolutionaries offed Joe Colombo. They hadn't been around for the days of Murder, Inc., when tough guys like Anastasia perfected the art of gangland killing. It was 7 in the morning, but a big crowd had already gathered in the cold behind the crime scene tape stretched across the intersection. One man dragged his sons out of bed and brought them over on the subway to view the morbid spectacle. This was history, he figured, something they could tell their sons about. The networks rolled film as anchormen told a grisly tale of the mean streets. A few silk-tied armchair mobsters offered commentary on the sidelines. "It's just like The Godfather. They filmed it down the block, you know. Yeah, Corleone got hit right over there. You seen The Godfather? Oh, you should. It's really good. And the gang that couldn't shoot straight, that was about Joey Gallo." "If you ask me," said his pal, "a bodyguard is there to shoot, not to get shot." "I don't know why you even went there. It just opened. You want decent food, you go to Vinny's down the block." Chief Seidman made his way under the tape into the sea of green and white Plymouth Furies outfitted with sirens. He stood next to Deputy Police Commissioner Robert Daly in the icy drizzle. "He made a mistake, Crazy Joe did," said Daly. "He should have gone to bed last night." Detectives jotted down the facts in notebooks. Yellow measuring tape stretched between overturned tables. The photo unit snapped the camera-ready bloodbath. The white tile floor was a mess of red chunks mixed with plate and glass shards. A guy who had a stake in the place was ready to clean up for lunch. "How soon do you think I can reopen?" "Why don't you shut up?" snapped the chief. "If we get any trouble from you, we'll stay here a week." Forensics checked the gore. It was ketchup and hot sauce. The latent print unit dusted white mineral powder on the glass of the side door onto Mulberry Street and rushed the stack of Polaroids to a guarded loft at 400 Broome Street near headquarters. Detective Scalise flipped through to see which prints looked promising. The feds used newfangled computers, but Scalise preferred a magnifying glass and bloodshot eyes. "A machine can't make the identifications we make," said Scalise. He pulled the thick stack of mob prints from the special files of worn metal cabinet, laid out on 83 10-inch cards. Chief Seidman got the police engineering unit on the big board. They neatly drew a ruled Umberto's diagram, marking bullets by the large square indicating the kitchen area, the straight line showing the location of the clam bar, and the round circles indicating table locations. A flip chart with neat, clear diagrams is a modern management technique to make it look like you know what you're doing, said the chief. That's very important when you don't have a damn thing to go on. Allie Boy Persico stepped out into the crisp spring air of Blue Mountain Manor, his brother's horse farm in Saugerties in upstate New York, eager to live the life of a country gentleman. The morning light mixing with the smell of manure was enough to make him want to kick back with a cold one, maybe go fishing. He had a lot of living to catch up on after a lifetime behind bars in the New York State penal system. 30 years before, at 6 in the morning, the cops got a call that they got him. They were directed to a 26-year-old dock sweeper, fresh out of 5 years in Sing Sing on robbery and assault, shot 4 times in the back and neck and left face down in the Carroll Street gutter where he belonged. Junior was picked up on the homicide. An 8-state alarm went out for Allie Boy. For 2 weeks, Allie Boy went on the lam, but as the eldest of the notorious Persico brothers, he had a duty to his little brother. Allie Boy hired an attorney to arrange his surrender, and on March 16, 1951, turned himself in to Captain Terranova of the 17th Detective Division. He pled guilty to second-degree murder. Allie Boy got 20 to life. He took his time like a man, while Junior worked his way up the ranks of the Profazzi family. Now, Junior was in jail, and while Allie Boy was ready to strap on the Lugers and carry the mantle for the Persico brothers, he didn't want to start blasting Gallows and jeopardize Junior's appeal with a lot of bad press. When the court rejected the appeal, Allie Boy loaded up. He had plenty of time to fish later. Now came the hunt. One by one, Persico soldiers slinked upstate to the Snakes farm, deep in the hills of Ulster County. Like Johnny Bath Beach said, laying low in Miami Beach until the heat blew over, a lot of funny things are happening with the Gallows, and something is going to have to be done with these people. There would be no hit parade on this one, the usual list of targets in order of importance. All Gallows were to be exterminated. No reprieves would be granted. No permission or clearance was needed for the hits. This was a Colombo problem, and if members of another family involved themselves, Allie Boy had prior permission to kill them. He told the Persico crew not to go home at night and to stay in groups of 3 and 4. No private jobs, no robberies, no hijackings until all Gallows were dead. No one would go hungry. The Persicos stashed up enough money to support a long war, and when the Gallows were dead in their graves, selected kids who participated in hits would be eligible for membership in the Brigade, the Borgata, the family. Persicos needed to do the biggest part of the work, so when the Colombo family reorganized, Persicos would emerge as the dominant crew and take the biggest share of rewards. Times had changed in the 30 years he'd been behind bars, but Allie Boy hadn't. He was taking the Colombos back to the old days, back when the ranks were free of the undesirables who had infested President Street. He'd blast the hippies, blacks, Puerto Ricans, and Gallows out of Red Hook. 12 rifles, 2 shotguns, hundreds of rounds of ammo, 40 firework bombs that looked and sounded just like hand grenades, good to smoke Gallows out of President Street. The rifles were well calibrated on the farm, tested in rounds of target practice. Allie Boy got in the passenger seat of the main car. Charlie the Moose stepped in the crash car with the guns. If any Gallows pulled a roadside ambush, the Moose would plow right into them and start blasting. Jerry Lang got in the driver's seat next to Allie Boy and turned on the ignition. Gang war could be a rough one. New York Times, April 12, 1972. The odds favored the Colombos in terms of sheer manpower. 118 committed members, reported NYPD intelligence. But with the boss still in a coma in his split-level home on 85th Street, the team lacked the proper leadership. Neither of the acting bosses, Joe Yak and Vincent Alloy, had the experience or the temperament to be a wartime leader, said the New York Times. Junior was a groomed warlord, but he had been sidelined in the Atlanta pen, forcing him to give orders through Allie Boy, who visited on a regular basis. If Allie Boy didn't step up to the plate, some of the old Profazzi captains might have to come out of retirement. Henry Fontana, Johnny Bath Beach, Sally the Sheik. Bad guys, heavy hitters. On the other side, the Gallo group is missing 2 of the 3 Gallo brothers, continued the Times, but is still strong enough to cause a lot of damage. Kid Blast was the wild card. His only action had been from the sidelines a decade before. He wasn't a negotiator like Larry. He wasn't as aggressive as Joey. Then again, the papers said he was smarter than both. He had spent a lot of time behind the chessboard, training to master the ancient game of combat. Both sides have the men and the guns to make it the bloodiest internal mafia conflict in many years, concluded the Times. Strap-hangers shoved their way onto the subway, checking the score in the tabloids. 5th Gang Slaying. New York Post, April 11, 1972. Even tough guys watched their mouth around thick Gennaro Ciprio. As one federal agent described him, he was a dangerous man who could have done a lot of damage in any war unless he was hit first. After boss Colombo got shot at the Unity Day rally, hot-blooded Ciprio went berserk, swinging at black men in a rampage. A better cook than a bodyguard, he didn't stop the bullet that felled his boss, but fixed a mean red sauce in stints as the top chef at his restaurant, Gennaro's Feast Specialties. At 2:45 in the morning, 69 hours after Crazy Joe was whacked, Ciprio stepped from the feast to move his rental car. Across 86th Street, a sniper picked him off from the rooftop of Velo Frock's dress shop. 6 bodies in 12 days. Daily News, April 12, 1972. Coming in at 5 feet 9 inches, 300 pounds, was a small-time loan shark, Frank Fariano, who was found behind a shanty in a parking lot by the Holland Tunnel with a bashed-in head and a slug in his shoulder. On him was $100, a wristwatch, a bus driver's license, and work papers for his janitor job in the Elizabeth, New Jersey school system. 7th Mob Slaying. New York Post, April 12, 1972. Hours after they buried Crazy Joe, jewel thief and Colombo wannabe Richard Grossman was unwrapped from black plastic and removed from the trunk of a 1961 Dodge Dart. The cops found him thanks to an anonymous tipster calling in to say, "This one is for Joey Gallo. We cannot permit the streets of this city to become a battleground for gang warfare," Police Commissioner Patrick Murphy said at a press conference. Chief Inspector Michael Codd added if the war didn't stop, innocent persons could be killed by a stray bullet. Gangland figure found slain. City's gang-style murders rise to 8. New York Times, April 20, 1972. Clad in a brown leather jacket, bookie David Wolosky was found sprawled in front of Beth Israel Hospital on 1st Avenue, DOA, with gunshot wounds to the chest and lung. The tip of his right pinky was missing. Perhaps a Sicilian message, an underworld code from The Godfather. But NYPD Detective Foresta said, "The little finger, that's nothing. Maybe it got shot off, or maybe it got caught in the door." Bodies dropped like flies. The Mets lost 3 in a row to the Astros in a brutal summer at Shea. The Yankees slumped in the worst losing streak of the season, while hits racked up across the city, from William Del Russo, shot 3 times in front of the crowded Georgie Girl Bar on New Utrecht Avenue in Brooklyn, to Rosario Stabile, a truck dispatcher found dead in a car near Prospect Park. Tabloids hung the bodies on Gallos and Colombos, but behind the hype, the score was still 1-1 in the Gallo-Colombo war. The Ciprio hit turned out to be an inside job. Colombos popped him off for being a Gallo double agent. Grossman was a wash, not for Joey Gallo, like the tipster said. The body was in the trunk before Joey even got killed. Gang war was a good chance to trim the fat on old beef, opening the door for families to get some hits out of the way. In his first major news profile, the New York Times credited Kid Blast with patience in the 4 months since his brother was gunned down, claiming that Red Hook saw it as not cowardice, but merely prudence, that Blast sat it out on President Street. The food is rich and good at this headquarters, Brooklyn detectives say, but Gallo still manages to stay trim and to find time for female companionship. He was portrayed in a teen idol picture to complement the puff piece, offering a nice side angle of his chops, just the right size to cut out and paste on a trading card. The Neapolitan Noodle was good for a meet, a nice Italian restaurant tucked away on Manhattan's Upper East Side. A new place, only 2 weeks old, it was off the radar from the usual Colombo hangouts, which were completely staked out. The street wasn't heavily trafficked, and if by chance a cop walked by, it would be too hard to make identifications. The place was basement level and didn't have good visibility through the front windows. Alley Boy had it checked out well in advance, taking no chances with the heat all over him. He couldn't piss without getting a federal indictment, like the one he was slapped with for making false statements on a government-insured loan, delivered to the farm by 8 carloads of FBI men and New York State troopers, just as he was rolling out to give a hurting on the gallows. They seized the stash in the barn and added receiving firearms in interstate commerce to his federal shit list. His lieutenant, Jerry Lang, got busted on fireworks possession for the grenades. In the 4 months since the raid, Alley Boy hadn't even gotten a good shot at any of the gallows. The pizza squad was back on President Street, offering the best security force a taxpayer could buy. Colombo's hadn't been able to replenish the war coffers with the feds knocking out their gambling rings, leaving Alley Boy hungry. He sat with Jerry and had a few drinks at the end of the kidney-shaped bar while they waited for their table. Joining them was Junior's pride and joy, little Alley Boy. By 9 o'clock, the small bar area was packed with a Friday night crowd, including Charlie the Moose and 2 of Frank Fusco's boys, coming in separately over 10-minute intervals, just to be safe. They all stood at the bar until the table was ready. Alley Boy and Jerry got up from the bar stools, which were quickly taken by 2 kosher meat wholesalers, glad to take a load off after a long week. The host took the Colombos to their big table in back. The waiter offered them the wine list, with plenty of good bottles from the big rack dividing the dining area and the bar. First the wine, then food, then business. There was a lot to bring to the table. Directly uptown on Pleasant Avenue, the Lucchesi family was making a fortune on wholesale heroin. They operated the whole enterprise like clockwork. Poppy brokers in Asia, processing plants in Europe, smuggling routes to bring the white powder into the city, cutting rooms in the tenements to whack it up, blacks to deal in Harlem, political connections to keep the heat off their back. If the supply ran out, they counted on detectives from the Special Investigations Unit who were stealing dope seized from the French Connection and selling it back to the dealers wholesale. The Colombo family needed to start thinking about the future. Little Alley Boy's generation was tired of not getting in on the action. They grew up on the stones and street fighting. They weren't afraid of junk and weren't going to let anyone stand in their way. Don Corleone was shot for the same reason. The kids had their heads all full of that Godfather shit. Frank Fusco's boys didn't agree. Colombo's needed to stick with gambling and honorable vice, but the drug business would destroy the family. Maybe not now, but in the years to come. Whatever heat Colombo's felt now would be tenfold on that white powder. The Gallo matter would pass. Nobody gave a damn about the gallows. The city was better off without them. Once they were dead in the grave, things would cool. Business would come back to normal. Back at the bar, the meat wholesalers talked shop. Sheldon Epstein managed Empire Veal and Lamb in the Bronx. Max Tekelch and Leon Schneider were with Flushing Meats in Brooklyn. Jack Forum owned the famous meat market in Coney Island. One of their daughters was engaged to a guy who worked at the Noodle. It seemed like a great place to take the wives, gathered at the other end, right by the loner who had just walked in. The loner was short and stocky, middle-aged, with thick black hair down to his shoulders. It looked like a wig. He was new in town, just in for a short stint from Vegas. He plunked down a $10 bill for a scotch and water. He sipped it slow and listened in on the conversation by the wine rack. They sounded like a couple of Brooklyn guys. They all got up from the bar. Their table was ready, reserved for 9:30. Outside on 79th Street, A Colombo capo was late for the meet. He had a taste for black leather trench coats. According to the New York Post, he made his way under the green and white awning of the Noodle and walked down the steps from the sidewalk. Opening the door, he saw a long-haired freak pull 2 long-barreled .38s on a group of guys heading for their table. Everybody was screaming. A guy grabbed his wife and pulled her down behind the table. The hitman stood there firing 9 shots, slow and calculated. The capo turned around and ran, knowing he might not be so lucky the next time around. Mob war now perils public. Daily News, August 15, 1972. Max DeKelch's widow would be sickened at The Godfather and consider Mario Puzo a writer of hardcore pornography. She would be correct, just as correct as she would be in saying Jimmy Breslin's The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight was the product of demented thinking, wrote Jimmy Breslin in his Newsday column. The gang that couldn't shoot straight shoots your husband in the back in a restaurant. Gangster chic was dead. At his morning press conference at City Hall, Mayor Lindsay, reeling from his ill-fated bid for the Democratic nomination for president, answered for the actions of his former appointees, saying, "The recent murder of innocent citizens by gangland executioners is an outrage, which demands that the romanticization of the mob must be stopped and the gangsters run out of town." The mayor passed the buck to Police Commissioner Patrick Murphy, charging him to do everything within his power to see to it that this city is no place for mobsters to do business. The FBI gave him a hand. Murphy needed all the help he could get after the recent revelations of the Knapp Commission, which detailed the unsavory activities of his 6th Narcotics Force in East Harlem, who had been trading heroin and cocaine to junkie informants in exchange for power tools and a mini-bike. One of the detectives handed over a wish list, 2 bottles each of Smirnoff, Harvey Bristol Cream, and Jack Daniels, all for his daughter's bridal shower. Another told his addict he wanted smokes. "I don't want Pall Mall either. Parliament, you know." "What about Winston?" "No, I don't know anybody that smokes Winston." Heading over to President Street, an FBI agent finally made good on Crazy Joe's old request to get him some Colombo mug shots. One of Junior's detective cousins had been able to get the Persicos all the Gallo mug shots for easy reference, stashed away in a family Bible. "They know what we look like," complained Joey, "but we don't know what they look like." Gathering the gang together, the agent showed a pile of Colombos. "These are the guys you're after," he said, then compared the stack of mug shots to photos of the Noodle victims. "These are pictures of businessmen. You don't shoot them." The opening scene with the big wedding just blew him away. All that music, honor, and dancing. "So on the money," said Sammy the Bull. "It was crazy." Even the mob stuff. The part about going to the mattresses took him back to the old days of the Profazzi War, to when he and Tommy Snake and Lenny the Mole got in a barroom shootout with some gallows over on New Utrecht Avenue. "It was like a cowboy movie," remembered the Bull. "Totally unbelievable." And what that Turk pulled, the kidnapping and the drugs and the hit on old man Corleone? "Completely ruthless," said Joey the Hitman, showing up on the David Susskind show with a voice modulator and black ski mask. "He doesn't give a fuck." The Bull could give a lesser fuck about the fedoras sold at the souvenir shops, or the Godfather board game, or the Godfather spaghetti hawked by the Paramount merchandising staff, or even the proposed Godfather pizza franchises, hero shops, bakeries, and lemon ice stands. Leave that for the tourists. On screen in 5 separate theaters across mid-Manhattan, this was it. Lines wrapped around the block. "I left that movie stunned," admitted the Bull. "I mean, I floated out of the theater. Maybe it was fiction, but for me, then, that was our life. It was incredible. I remember talking to a multitude of guys, made guys, everybody, who felt exactly the same way." "That lens, does it make me look like John Derrick?" "No," said New York Post photographer Frank Leonardo, setting up the shot. "No way. Are you Sicilian?" "Neapolitan," said Coppola. "There are Neapolitan gangsters, Al Capone, Vito Genovese, Luciano. Thick, with a full beard and wild black hair, 33-year-old Francis Ford Coppola looked the part of the young genius in his orange racing scarf, unkempt brown corduroy suit, and loose socks. He sat in the lobby of the St. Regis Hotel, where 3 weeks before, in the midst of a blizzard, the orchestra played Nino Rota's waltz at the Godfather opening night party. 18 bouncers in double-breasted pinstripe suits kept anything funny from happening. Sitting in the invitation-only crowd was Sidney Korshak, Chicago's man in Hollywood, having taken Don Corleone's advice that a lawyer with his briefcase can steal more than 100 men with guns. In the weeks since, his film bringing in $1 million a day at the box office, Coppola dismissed any intention of glamorizing the mob, stating that Puzo's story was pure fiction. I don't think these people were or are like that, romantic figures. I think they're awful people. I don't think there's a quarter of an ounce of loyalty among them. I hated the guys I was reading about. I really did. It just struck me that this sense of honor, taking care of your own, is what this country doesn't have. What if the United States of America took care of its people the way Don Corleone took care of his own? So to me, The Godfather is total fiction and metaphor. I never took it all that seriously in the first place. There is no Godfather. New York Post, April 6, 1972. Massapequa kids like to throw the ball and skate around the circle in front of Mr. Gambino's modest yellow brick home on Club Drive, a horseshoe strip of ranch houses with an ocean view. Preferring treats to tricks, the old man doled out nickels on Halloween, and though the neighborhood kids thought it was icky how the candy he gave out was unwrapped, nobody dared roll him with toilet paper. He had a reputation as being a good neighbor. "I used to shovel his driveway in the winter," said one boy. "I'd ring his doorbell, and he usually answered the door himself. At first, some of our parents did tell us to stay away. You know, they were worried about the gangsters. But I have nothing against him." Coming to terms with low-flying helicopters swooping down 4 or 5 times a day, Club Drive liked having Gambino on the turf. He brought good protection with plenty of police surveillance. As soon as the kids could tell the difference between a wheelman and a Fed, the Feds drove Fords, nobody worried much about drive-bys. But a mother was a mother, and with the gang war all over the papers, she told her son not to shovel snow at Mr. Gambino's until the heat cooled. Snow piled up over the course of the Gallo-Colombo War, heaping suffering on old man Gambino. If only all 5 families were as honorable as his, so disciplined that when he waved a hand, people appeared from nowhere to do his bidding. This kind of incessant feuding would be the death of them all, unless steps were taken, streamlining all 5 families into one, with the fat sliced off, leaving a lean organization as it was in the old days under the great bandit chieftain Salvatore Marenzano, who had ruled New York City as a capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses, before Lucky Luciano killed him off to create the commission. Gambino wanted peace. His heart couldn't take the strain of endless gang war. He placed 11 pills on the table to show the visiting FBI agent, whom he had invited to join him for his morning breakfast of a grapefruit, a toasted English muffin, and coffee. He took another bottle of pills from his pocket, explaining, "I have to take 30 pills a day." Gambino had to take pills to even walk outside his home. He could not travel or make any plans because he did not know from one day to the next where he would be. He could be in the hospital tomorrow just as well as at his own home. His brother Joey had just suffered a heart attack. His brother Paul was sick too. When the Fed asked Gambino if he would mind any further visits to his home, Gambino said, "I'm always around. I never go any place. I'm a sick, sick man." If only he had no heart at all. Kid Blast never should have cut his hair. Tony Bernardo convinced him it would grow back, but never did. The Greek, free to throw an insult from the safety of witness protection, said his hair plugs looked like dirty rings. Blast stuck it out on President Street. The rough patches filled in, enough so that he looked like that lead in the Scorsese movie where De Niro's in debt to the bookie, said Detective Bartles. Surviving the odds in the 2 years since Joey's death, Blast was looking good, but now Charlie the Moose was on his ass as new boss of the Colombo family, whatever that was worth anymore, declaring that all fall in line or fall in the streets. After 15 years of gang war, Gallo underboss Mooney Cutrone decided he had finally had enough of being a Gallo, of watching Batman reruns, playing pinochle, and eating Umberto's pasta. Going to the mattresses was bad for his aging back. He left President Street for good, taking Sammy the Syrian with him and 23 other Gallos. Blast was furious after having taken care of the gang, keeping them out of drugs, and reportedly forking over the greens to compensate for lost rackets. "We are very honorable," Blast told one NYPD investigator. "You think you're the Godfather. You shouldn't go to the movies. You're going to get killed one of these days. If that's the way it's got to be, then that's the way it's got to be." Kid Blast went to the mattresses, holing up at Roy Roy's social club with the last of the 15 Gallos, aging mod squatters, hanging on until they were so broke that they had to leech off the hot dog man who worked on the corner of President Street until the vendor walked over to headquarters and demanded his $60 tab. By then, the 5 families were so sick of Gallos, they decided to give Blast whatever the hell he wanted. In his mid-40s, Kid Blast, as the legend goes, was at last made a man. Not by the Colombos, but Chin Gigante, boss of Greenwich Village. Nicknamed the Odd Father, Chin ran the Genovese family from village social clubs, then wandered onto McDougal Street in his bathrobe while muttering to himself, feigning insanity to keep the feds off his tail. Crazy Joe would have been proud. Today, Kid Blast lives on, his notorious past dissolved into legend, having stayed out of trouble and out of the press for 3 decades. In the city's effort to clean up the stinking Gowanus, a sewer line was dug into Columbia Street in the 1970s. The open trench became a hive of rats and mosquitoes. In time, the entire block of President Street by the waterfront would be razed, as if to eliminate any lingering trace of the Gallos. Then, after the sewer was filled back in, Columbia Street began its 20-year rise as a choice spot to live for modern-day Brooklyn hipsters. In 2008, the Swedish furniture giant IKEA inched in on Gallo turf. Far more successful than Junior's attempted cross-dressing kamikaze raids on the dormitory. This has been a Highbridge Audio production.